Hi folks, Mike again, and in this VT we're going to show you how to create a pinboard map. So this is kind of, as you can see in this image here and in sort of a few of the intro videos for this week, it's just a different way of showing maps. This is a really good way of just coming up with routes, which especially when you're doing your UT stuff will be really valuable. So instead of just throwing some blocks down into the engine hoping something works, route planning is a really key critical stuff, especially in multiplayer games. So you don't want only one route to the bases, things like that. So I'm going to show you this technique from nothing, and just how to build it up to get a much more high fidelity map, and some little bits and pieces just so even the map looks a little bit better. So on here you can see these drop shadows. They actually make it look a little bit cleaner and a little bit nicer as we're going along through it. So our first step is basically getting this a blank canvas and then actually just putting these pins onto it, and then I'll show you how to do the rest as we're going along. Okay, so what you want is a new document. Let's go with 500 by 500, doesn't matter about anything else really. Make sure you are in RGB color. If you're in black and white or grayscale, sorry, if you're in bitmap or grayscale, you do need to change that to RGB, otherwise you can't actually see any color, and it's all grayscale, which is bad. 8-bit's fine and all this, and we'll change everything as we go. So let's get this started as well. So again, if you've just opened Photoshop kind of the first time, or this is relatively new stuff, your display may just look like this. So one of the things that we do need is to actually activate the rulers for this, and these are going to help us out a lot. So with pixels we can use the pixel grid, but for this we're actually starting a lot higher resolution, and doing things like that as well, just so we can get nicer lines than we can possibly do in pixel art. So we can either go Control R, or if you go to our view and then rulers, there you go, it will set them up. Now again, if you've never used rulers before, they're probably not set up correctly, or to what we want to do. They're usually set up to inches, which is terrible. So if you just literally find where they are and then double click on them, you should get your preferences for them. If not, you just have to search for the preference manager somewhere, and then find units and rulers and change that to pixels. So it probably comes in like inches, and that's utterly useless unless we're doing proper massive artworks. We just want pixels there. The rest of this should be fine, so let's give that an OK. So what this does, you should be able to see, is it gives us coordinates from basically from minus to positive, but because we've built a 500 by 500, that's kind of the rulers we're using. So wherever our mouse is, you should be able to see the rulers tracking you at the top, there we go, and at the sides as well, which is useful for what we're doing. So first things first, let's get a good background color for this. So instead of kind of a palette color, I actually want to use something a bit more solid and dark. So I have gone for this kind of, again, bit of a dark grey. Here, let's just fill that. So fill is G if you don't know that one. It kind of looks a little bit like the background. Again, we can modify this, we can change it, it doesn't matter. But we want a darker colour for this, just so we can actually see what happens when we use the rulers a little bit more. So in order to get these rulers to where we want them, because I actually want a grid of rulers, all you do is find the side or find the top, and then just click, hold and drag, and you should get that. Now this will snap to certain points, so the edges, we don't actually need anything at the edges because we're never going to draw on the edges. What we want to do is just place these close enough to, doesn't matter if you want to out, to our centers. So we're going to do every 100 pixels, we want a line. Missed that one. But again, it doesn't matter, it's 1 pixel out. For this, not really important. If you do want that, just put your move tool on and then you can re-grab it. Ooh, it can be tricky, as seen. There we go, got it. So I'll have my 4 lines there, and then if we drag downwards, we can do exactly the same. Again, you can pretty fast forward until I'm done. or you can watch me painfully place these images, image lines. There we go. Wasn't that fun? Okay, so once we've got this down, again, you can have a bigger grid, you can have a smaller grid, it doesn't matter. When we're doing these, 4x4 is kind of, I would probably say the smallest you want to go to. 3x3 doesn't give you anything that you can't really just think about in any way. So 4x4 is a good place to start. We can always make things bigger, we can always change things. That's kind of how mapping works. Nothing is set in stone, especially at this kind of planning stage. So once we've got this down, we can get rid of all this by just pressing Ctrl H at any point. So the same thing as the pixel helpers, if you've watched the other VT. And we can also get rid of the rulers if you really want to, but to be honest, they're quite useful. So we can either just use these as the pins for the pin board, or we can actually go and make some like literal pins, little circles that we can place down. It's up to you and how you really want to work with these things. I'll actually place these down just so you can see how it works. Now I'll stick with that. So what we're going to do is always add new layer. I'll just call this pins for now, and then let's pick another color. So make sure you do this. You can change things afterwards. There's always all these settings which you can always go into in Photoshop, but to minimize the aggravation issue, if you've never touched this before, always set up your stuff before you actually put it on, because coming back to it if you don't know how to grab it gets annoying. So I've gone for this kind of shiny blue. Again, it doesn't matter what we go for as long as it's not grey. So I'm going to grab my tool here, so it might just be a rectangle tool. I'm going to go for an ellipse, which we can use as a circle as well. So all I'm going to do is drag this out a bit. If you hold shift, then you can actually make stuff. It doesn't matter if it's not where you want it, we will move it, but if you hold things down, you should notice that it actually will snap to certain points of this grid when you're moving through, and that's kind of the point of where we're after. So I'm going to do something maybe like that. There we go. I've got this circle. Depends which version of Photoshop you've got. You might have some other options across the top, or you might have some on the side coming up, but that is fine for us. So you probably also got your anti-aliasing on, things like that. Again, this doesn't matter when we're doing stuff. So as soon as we've got one pin, I'm just going to press V and I'm going to move it, and you should be able to kind of center it. It may be a little bit off. It's just how pixels work, I suppose, when you're coming to do this. Great, so I've got that there. I could get rid of my helper, it's still there. So with this, we just want to duplicate this pin to all these other things. There are tons of ways of doing it. You could grab your move tool, hold Alt, and then you will get that kind of double cursor, and then you can do that for it like such. Notice every time you do that, you're going to make a new layer for it, which again is fine. You could, where are we? Grab just that there, and then we can actually go to move and drag it down. If you've got it selected and you're in move and you're holding Alt, it won't make a new layer. This is where Photoshop gets somewhat annoying if you're not au fait with it. And we could just make it there. These are all in the same layers, but just make sure not to change some things. I've actually just duplicated that instead, haven't I? No, I've got rid of one. So again, Photoshop has some pernickety bits which are actually really annoying. So doing things like this, we can do that. Or once we've got all that, what we could do is grab all of our layers. So I'm just going to shift and select them all, right click and then merge them. Make sure you don't grab the background in there, otherwise you are scrumped. If you've got anything selected, you just hold Control D to deselect, and then I could just copy and paste these again if I have them selected, or if they're all on one layer, just to get them down. What I'm going to do is actually just duplicate the layer, then merge it back in. So duplicate, I can either right click and go to duplicate, or I can go Control J and do that as well. Move them down, something like that. Might be a little bit off. You duplicate, when you actually duplicate, sometimes just moves it a few pixels out to the side. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Same with copy and paste for this. So once that's done, I'm just going to merge those two layers again. Careful with the merge. As I said, if you get the background in there, you are going to become undone, but you can always undo stuff. If you don't know, with Photoshop, Control Z is not undo. Control Z is just a step backwards, which will go, oh, I'll undo that, and then you do it again, and then it will actually redo that. So if you want undo in Photoshop, it's actually Control Alt and Z. Remember that one. It'll save you at some point in the future. Right, anyway, I've got my pin board. So what I could actually do now is get rid of those rulers, and I've got this nice grid, and then I set up for it. Cool. Okay, so now I suppose we start drawing some paths in. So I'm just going to put that to 150, I think, as well. Ooh, look at that. So let's add ourselves a new layer, and let's go for a new color. So let's go for solid red. It's a good place to start. And what we're going to do is we're going to draw these together in some way, and we're just going to make a basic path. So in my previous example, everything's actually symmetrical, which you probably want in some way for a UT map. Especially if it's not deathmatch, if it's capture the flag and stuff, because you don't want one side having an advantage in any sort of way. So that's just the way, that's the reason I've done it for that. But you could just do a normal base and then just have this as a section of a bigger map or anything like that. So this is just a tool to help. It's not the answer. It's just a way of getting to the answer, I suppose. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our brush tool. So it could be B. Could be anything. So if we just draw that kind of looks something like that. That's probably alright, to be honest. You can mess around with this, change the brush size to it, so smaller, larger, doesn't really matter. There we go, close enough. We can mess around with other settings. Do make sure you've got opacity 100, otherwise we'll cause some issues. But you can do literally whatever you want for it. So we don't have to be as precise as we need to do with pixels. We can do whatever we want here. So a few ways of doing this. I actually prefer using the grid, but these pins are quite useful as well. So I'm going to leave everything on. So this layer, I'll call this main route. There we go. So what we want to do is basically make a path. Now it doesn't have to be curved. Doing this straight first is really useful, and then we can curve it later. Is what we kind of want to do for it, and then we can just build it up over time or change stuff or go back to it. So if we've just got this on its own layer, we can then delete it and start again. Doesn't matter as long as we're using new layers for everything. So I'll make a very basic path. In order to do this, instead of trying to I'll click here and then draw a line and then I'll go down here or whatever, not useful. Although if you start doing that, as you've probably seen there, it will actually kind of stick to that line to an extent, which is good. The other way of doing it is just clicking in the middle of that line. You've got a dot now, so what we can do is hold shift, and then if we click somewhere else close again to a central point, so I like using the points as well, it will make us a straight line between those 2 points. We don't have to do anything else, it is just there, it works straight away. So again, hold shift and click will make us that kind of route and that path. So I'm just going to keep this symmetrical for now. Drop that down there as well. So if you want to start this again, you just release shift, click somewhere, and then hold shift down and create it again. So I think, yeah, let's make kind of the same thing actually. So I'm just going to hold shift and drop that there. So we're going to keep on this. I think we'll make this into kind of a weird circle. Why not? Doesn't matter. There we go. So we've got a basic route, or two routes really, if our bases are on the edges, which sounds like a good plan. So we can always just zoom out, maybe to 100. Where are we? Get rid of the pins, and then we've got our basic route gone in there. So I'm going to add a new layer. Let's go with low ground. It doesn't really matter. Helps if you can spell as well, and we'll pick a different color. Doesn't really matter. Let's go for luminous green, I suppose, for it as well. And because we've got a new layer, we can just do whatever we want. So if I want some underground roots that kind of come out, maybe from the base, there we go, never mind. Let's stick one there, and let's go, I don't know, something like that. So if I want to then link this again and just release everything and then hold shift and then join it up. Again, we don't have to be infinitely precise with this. This is perfectly fine. Let's add another route in. Again, you can do as many as you want. It's up to you how you end up going around designing your levels, sort of thing. We're just here to kind of give you some examples and ideas of how to generate routes as well. So we'll call this high ground. And then maybe we'll just have something basic. Let's just have sort of a sniper post, I suppose, and let's just build it here as some squares in the corner. And again, not doing anything massively taxing. This is a very odd looking map, to be honest, but there we go. And we've got kind of a basic route. Now, it's getting a little bit tricky to see things here. So if we get rid of the pins, I suppose, you can see that you've got multiple routes. So what I'm going to do is a very simple thing that's going to add a lot of fake depth to this, but it will help. So I'm going to reorder my layers, because I started with my main route, and then I put a low ground on. So all I'm going to do is move this low ground to under the main route. So all you have to do is click there, then drag it under. As you can see there, the green is now under the red. That's how our layers work. And for the high ground, I'm going to double click over here. If I double click on the name, it'll rename it. If I double click over here, drag it in, it will give me my layer style blending options. So I can do quite a lot of things with this. There's a lot of power in layer styles, but I'm just going to add a very simple drop shadow to it. Again, we just have to mess around with things. So you should be able to see there's a very small shadow just appeared there. So I'm just going to mess this up a bit. Something like that maybe. Change the things. So there's a lot of different things we can do, and a lot of things look terrible. If we add a little bit of distance, it'll start going down. Hopefully you should be able to see there's a little bit of 3D now appearing in our world. Keep the angle at 90 for this as well. And we can always multiply things out, make it a bit more stronger, or something like that. So there's tons of stuff we can mess around with in Photoshop, and this is one of the very, very powerful tools. But I'm just going to keep this drop shadow on, keep it simple for now. So let's give that an OK. You should be able to see we now have an effects area here, and we've got an FX thing here, which is just showing us our layer is being almost post-processed as well. So we could change this, and then it will have all these things added onto it as well. So if I started drawing on with my brush, you can see that layer effect is actually getting drawn on as well. So we can modify this, and then we don't have to do anything. If I keep going with this, what I'm going to do is just right click on here, and I'm going to copy the layer style, and then we can paste this layer style onto everything else. Simple as that. And then once more, and hopefully you can see now, let me just drop that off, from something that looks a little bit weird, a little bit abstract, we can actually just give it that little bit of depth. And it does help quite a lot when we start coming to these things in a bit more detail. So again, this is a very odd map. I wouldn't, it's very square and everything like that. But that would be a very good start to how to use this pinboard method for doing stuff. And then we'd kind of start thinking about walls and obstacles or anything like that. And again, we can just start adding stuff in. Again, let's go with maybe a brown or something grey like that, and then go, right, where are we going to cut off? What are we going to do? So maybe we want a building in the middle, something like that. So we could also start adding in our layer styles to these. There we go, and it will start adding some stuff and some fidelity to our images the more we kind of go into them. So maybe some walls there and there. Again, you should probably keep these symmetrical. I'm not too fussed for now. I'll probably stick on a bit of anti-aliasing and I'll make it look a little bit better. Sorry, I'm used to working in pixels. So if you do put anti-aliasing on, it'll give you nicer edges rather than these a bit janky ones as we're going along. And then we can start building up these things as we're going along, or even just move things around as well for it. But just make sure you're doing stuff on other layers, because when you come to transform stuff and it's all on one layer, you can come a little bit unstuck. So that's kind of the basics, literally just step by step of how we made this, and then we just add in some extra details, throw in some arrows and things like that. So there is under your shape tool, you can go custom shape, and then Photoshop Basics has got quite a few basic things on. You can download extra things. So those little base images, those are things I made earlier, or I've got from a pack somewhere, I can't remember these days. And we can just add in some basic things. So most of these are quite useful. So, you know, arrows, tick boxes for player starts, whatever you want for it as well. So there's tons of stuff you can get within Photoshop, even if it's just to actually annotate a layer with, and just go, hey, look, here's the flag base. Over here, I've done it again. As I said, always make that new layer. Fallen foul of my own indecision there. There we go. Let me just transform that around and start pointing at things, going, yes, high pass route, or anything like that. And then you just build it up, and then you end up looking something like that as we're going along. And the rest of it is just down to experience and just actually doing it time and time again. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you, is just that step-by-step guide on how to create this kind of image. And then start building it up just with basic primitive objects, and we can start building on that map, maybe adding some nicer corners in or anything like that, and we can just draw over it as we're going along. But as a route planning method, it's actually very useful, and you'll see quite a lot of top designers do this very basic architecture to start with, and then start building in more content as we go along. Right, I will leave it at that for this VT.